If I had to describe what I've learned about leadership this semester in one image, it wouldn't be a stage. It definitely wouldn't be the spotlight. It would be a greenhouse. Not the aesthetic kind you see online, but a real one. Humid, controlled, often uncomfortable. A place where growth is happening, even when no one sees it. Because here's the truth: growth does not come from what looks impressive on the outside, it comes from what is carefully cultivated on the inside. And that completely changed how I understand leadership. At the beginning of this course, I defined Christian leaders as someone who has surrendered enough to God that God can trust them with influence without them worshiping it. And I still believe that. But now I understand why that matters. Because leadership is not about producing visible results as quickly as possible. It's about creating the kind of environment where real growth can actually last, a type of ecosystem. In my leadership interview, I realized something very important. Pastor Myers didn't talk about power, he didn't talk about recognition. He talked about consistency, discipline, responsibility. He talked about doing the right thing even when it's inconvenient, about saying no, about protecting the environment of the people you lead. And that is greenhouse work. It's quiet, it's intentional, and it determines everything that grows. When I looked at Kuzen Posner's 5 points of leadership, I stopped seeing them as strategies and started seeing them as ways to cultivate the environment. Let's look at it. Model the way. That's their first step. That's actually climate control. If the temperature in a greenhouse is off, nothing thrives. And if your character is off as a leader, neither will your people. Romans 12 talks about humility and sober judgment, not thinking too highly of ourselves. That's how you keep the environment healthy. It's inspire to share vision. Now that is intentional planting. You don't scatter seeds randomly and just hope for the best. There's direction, there's purpose, there's planning. And spiritually, that vision doesn't come from me, it comes from God. In 1 Corinthians, Paul reminds us that gifts come from the same Spirit for the common good. So leadership is not about building something impressive for myself. It's about stewarding what God is already growing. Challenge the process. Now that's pruning. And pruning is uncomfortable. You're cutting things that are alive, but they're unhealthy. Pastor Myers talked about stepping into tension instead of avoiding it. And it reminded me of Paul correcting the Corinthian church. They were gifted, but immature. And leadership required correction, not silence. It requires a maturity as well that doesn't always come with age. Enabling others to act. That's watering and spacing. You don't crowd plants in a greenhouse, you give them room to grow. That's what leadership should do. Not control people, not suffocate people, but equip them. Romans 12 shows us every person has a role, and leadership helps activate that. Now there's encourage the heart. This is the light. Without light, nothing grows. You can have perfect structure, perfect systems, and without the light, everything slowly dies. Encouragement is that light. Pastor Myers talked about recognizing people, building them up, speaking life into them. Now, that's not extra, that's essential. And it's a gift that leaders are given. But here's what challenged me most through all of this: you can have access to the greenhouse, you can have position, and still not know how to grow anything. That's what was happening in Corinth. They had gifts, they had potential, but they lacked maturity. They turned something meant for common good into something self-focused. And Paul had to redirect them, not into doing more, but to becoming different. So that forced me to ask myself, am I trying to produce visible growth without building the right environment? Am I chasing outcomes instead of faithfulness? Because leadership is not proven by how fast things grow. It's revealed by how well you steward what's growing. And stewardship requires surrender. That brings us back to my original definition. Surrender is what allows God to trust us with influence. Because without it, Influence becomes something we protect, something we promote, and eventually we begin to worship. The world says, get more, be more, take more. But scripture says, he must increase and I must decrease. That's greenhouse leadership. Less of me controlling the outcome, more of God shaping the environment. Even the idea that great leadership means choosing what to say no to fits in here. Because in the greenhouse, you don't just add things, you protect what's already growing. You remove distractions, you guard the space. But as a Christian leader, that discipline is not about success. It's about honoring God and serving others. All right, so going forward, this is how I want to lead. I want to be aware of the environment I create through my attitude, my consistency, and my decisions. I want to be intentional. I want to model integrity so the climate stays healthy. I want to align with God's vision, not just my own ideas. I want to challenge what's unhealthy, even when it's uncomfortable. And I want to give people the space to grow. I want to speak life into them consistently, not just when they're down. Most importantly, I want to stay surrendered because at the end of the day, I am not the one who causes growth. I tend the environment. And if I do that well, if I stay faithful in what's unseen, patient in the process, surrendered to the responsibility, then what grows out of that won't just look good on the outside. Just like Eden after creation, it will be a healthy ecosystem. It will be real, it will last, and it will point back to him.